Hello, everybody. I'm Ralph Ben Murgy, and welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi. Every week I do clarify for you that I am not indeed a rabbi. I am an ordained spiritual director, but I'm not a rabbi. But if I was a rabbi, I wouldn't be that kind of rabbi. So I hope that's clear to everybody who's listening. I'm going to have a great show in a moment, but before that, I'll wreck it all by just thinking out loud. Here's the thing. I'm having a bit of a spiritual crisis. My spiritual crisis is my belief in humanity. I'm very worried about us. I'm worried that we don't even know that we should be worried about what we're going through and how we're doing. You know, I see so many people taking a pass on the right thing to do because they're so scared that they're not going to have something. And this is a tectonic shift that we're going through right now. There's no doubt about that. It's not easy for anyone. It's existential. When people talk about, you've got 10 years and then the climate change is irreversible, that kind of existential threat is biblical in its proportion. And as we know, once we get to biblical proportions of things, we wait for miracles. And I don't think there's very many miracles that we can rely on right now. I think we have to try to figure out what we should do. And one of the things is we so lack this sense of community with each other that we can't come together. I'm always saying, why are there 34 lawnmowers on my street? Do we really need 34 different lawnmowers for that one stretch, that one block? Or could we just have a sign-up list and say, Saturday at 11, I'd like the lawnmower for an hour? But it doesn't even occur to us to come together that way. We've been atomized, commodified, and scarcity is what runs us. So it's all about what I can't give to that person. I can't say, look at them, they have a pension, they make good money. That's like supposed to be some insult. It's an awful thing that these people have a pension and that they, had a decent job with a decent wage. No, we should all be wanting that. It's not a race to our own bottom at this point. But the competitiveness is crowding out our ability to be communal. And without that communal sense, without that public space, that third space that none of us own, I don't know how we're going to get out of this. I've seen so many people just unable to take into their hearts that we're in a situation, even with children right in front of them, they can't do it. And I don't blame them. I worked with some people at a conference on just transition. How do you move from one carbon economy to a clean economy? And one of the guys, God love him, got up from one of the union locals that worked in the oil fields, in the tar sands. And I don't call them oil sands. That's just a bunch of PR nonsense. The tar sands. And he said, look, you can say leave it in the ground, but I've got a family. This is what I do. What am I going to do if you do this to me? So we have to find a way to build a bridge. We've got to build a bridge to the other side. And it's got to be one that's not, the house is on fire, let's run to nowhere. It's got to be the house is on fire, let's build a better house. Let's build a better way of being together. Let's build something that's sustainable. So that's kind of my spiritual crisis is, do I believe in us enough or am I just getting more disappointed? And I guess because I'm not, 23 anymore, I don't just see it as endless runway and, I'm sure it'll work out. I kind of look at life in decades now. And looking at it that way makes me sometimes impatient. When someone says, by 2040, no, I don't want 2040. We're now. We got to do it now. So I'm hoping that we can come up with a value proposition that can move people to decide that it's in their best interest, if nothing else, their best interest, that we come together and start doing things that really pull us out of this relentless, commodified life that we lead. I'm almost a senior. I don't want to be a senior. I'd like to cultivate some wisdom in my life and be an elder, but I'm certainly not interested in becoming a senior looking for discounts at the Shoppers Drug Mart. It's just not doing it for me. And I don't want to be the guy that they look at and go, well, he might buy one more car, but he's not going to buy 6 more cars. If he bought 6, I'd pay attention to him. I don't need that, and I don't think any of us need that. I think we live longer. Let's get together. Let's make it a more spiritually important life. So there's my rant. I feel agitated. I was hoping I'd feel better, but I feel agitated, which is a total bummer. On to my guest. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Rev Daniel. Rev Daniel apparently knew about me before I knew about him.
I did.
So the last name again?
Brereton.
You see, because I only know you as Rev Daniel.
That's fine.
Do most people just know you as Rev Daniel?
On Twitter, yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, they just call me Daniel.
Yeah. Do you? Some people like their honorific, and other people go, just call me Daniel.
I'm not a big one for honorifics or titles.
You see, I really think that a person has earned them. When I work in politics, I always call people like minister, premier, because you know what? They got there. Rabbis, I always say rabbi, even if I'm good friends with them. And so I'm going to, I don't care what you think. I'm going to call you Rev Daniel. I'm not just going to call you.
It's always
Daniel.
good to have a guest on your show that you don't care what they think.
I have no care to
good.
what you say. You cannot dissuade me
You
from
could be a
this.
member of my congregation with that attitude. They don't care either.
How many people in your congregation?
Oh, it depends on the weather and the Sunday.
Well, the membership.
Membership.
What's your membership?
We have I guess on our official parish list, we have about 400 people. But I mean, on a typical Sunday between two services, we'd only get about half that.
Well, that's not bad.
So not too bad. No, as far as mainline churches go. Yeah.
All right. Well, there's a lot for us to talk about. One of the things that you have always spoken about in your spiritual path is your sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
I do find the idea that we fixate so much on sexual orientation as opposed to, oh, and by the way, I have these major character flaws that you might want to know about.
Yeah, well, there's people that know about those too. So,
yeah, but a lot of people don't think about things like that. But if you mention sexual orientation, they're all over it.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so let's go to the point of when Daniel decides two things. One, that there is a spiritual calling in his life, and the other, that he is going to come to terms with his own sexuality. Which one comes first?
Oh, I mean, they kind of run fairly parallel, actually. I would say I would say I had a sense of a calling. Probably I was more clear about that before I started to explore sexual identity. So I mean,
so tell me about that calling. How did that manifest itself?
I mean, I was always I was raised in my family was Anglican, the church that I now serve, but they weren't super religious people. It was always sort of there in the background, you know, in a good mainline Christian kind of Christmas and Easter way. And so, you know, I had a twin sister, so she was taken to church along with me, but we had two very different experiences. Hers was sort of the typical, this is boring, and at what age can I, decide not to go anymore? I was more intrigued by it all. I wanted to know what those symbols meant and why we did what we did, and why people were. I was intrigued by the fact that the people there seemed to be taking all this very seriously, and yet I didn't see that it was having a huge impact on how they were living, and that fascinated me. So I mean, I think from an early age I did a lot of my own reading and trying to make sense of the Bible, which I didn't get very far with as a young child, and then when I was in university.
Well, wait a minute. I want to stop there because there's two pieces of that. One is what I believe is our failure to transmit spiritual ideas to children.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And even if we're successful at whatever pedagogy we use, we end up with a pediatric kind of view of religion that when your sister says, okay, I'm out, finally, they can't make me go. She's left with this pediatric Christianity or pediatric religion that's really about miracles and fairy tales and magic, but is not really grounding in any way.
Well, I would say there's people that are in church every Sunday for 60 years and still stay rooted in that kind of, like you say, pediatric religion.
Yeah. And people who've given it up, who when you ask them why, they'll give you the reasons that it's just a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
Why am I supposed to believe this?
Yeah.
What do you mean the Red Sea's parted?
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I mean, in some ways I've come to think very much about that, the parable of the sower, where, Jesus is talking about sowing seeds and some fall on this kind of soil and others fall on. And I mean, I think the church has to do a better job of teaching people to enter into the mystery and how that actually applies to our lives. But at the same time, I think people approach the divine and spirituality in different ways, and and at different times. And I think you can sow the seed, but it doesn't necessarily fall on ground that's ready for it then. And so I mean, there's a thing in Torah that says, and I've mentioned this before, that really you don't teach someone Torah till they're 20. Yeah. You just don't bother. Yeah. It's not a good idea. Yeah. And I wonder about that, because the other thing you mentioned when you said you were a kid sitting in a church was really about the theater of church, the ritual of church, the process, all of that. And I don't mean pejoratively. No. And I mean, that was one of the things that was attractive to me. Right. And I think one of the differences between myself and my sister toddled off to Sunday school, where she colored pictures and did, what children were supposed to do. Yeah. I insisted on staying in church with the adults, because that's where the drama was happening. Right. Didn't know what it meant, but I knew that there was something important happening there, and it was more important than flannel graph pictures of Jesus. Right. So, and I think that's one of the things the mistakes we've made actually with children and in terms of pedagogy is we've separated the younger generation and sent them off to their own space. And part of it is just to immerse them in the experience, right, and let them make of it what they will. Well, we used to just sort of wander around trying to avoid sitting beside our fathers. But you were allowed to do that in synagogue? Yeah, but so you moved in the Moroccan tradition that I was brought up in. It started off kind of egalitarian when we came to Canada, because it was a traditional people, not an Orthodox people. Right. But then the only people who really were as intent on keeping the traditions in the way of the old were the Orthodox, so that we became more Orthodox that way, right? Which is unfortunate as far as I was concerned, because then we got into the mechitza, which is the separating wall between the women and the men, stuff that I can't do. Yeah. I just don't believe that women and men have separate duties spiritually and religiously. Mm-hmm. And I have lots of relatives who believe totally that that's what you're supposed to do. But what we used to do is sort of just go from one wall over either side of the wall, because kids can do anything till they're 13. There's no need for them to fast on Yom Kippur. There's none of that. You do whatever you want. But we would just float in and out. But it was the culture that was getting us, not the teaching. Yep. Right? We didn't stop and go, now that's interesting, because there's Nachshon. He was the guy who actually walked into, forget it. You weren't interested in that. But you were connecting with the community. Yeah, and we were taught how to read Hebrew the way the Catholics were taught how to, pray in Latin. Yeah. There are faults to that too, though, because you can stop someone in the middle of a synagogue service and go, "Excuse me, I know you've been doing this prayer for 42 years. Do you know what it means?" And in English, and no, But see, I love to do that with my congregation, right? Like with parts of the liturgy. It's like, do you know why we do this? And I mean, I think that's one of the things that I've discovered is people are actually really hungry to understand, because they don't. And it's been assumed that they do know, and they don't. It's also, there's something to the idea that I don't need to know. I just need to be here with everybody. Yes, and it's done for me, and yeah, that's the problem. Well, how do you feel about that? Because I really don't like this sort of, I like that priest. I like him. Yeah. I mean, it's showbiz at that point, and I kind of find that. Well, I mean, there's, on one hand, you talked about the importance of community. So, I mean, there's always the issue of relationships, right? I mean, it's important that I have relationships with the people in my within boundaries, within, with my congregation, that I'm not just a figurehead, but that they actually have a sense of who I am as a person, and I have a sense of them. But on the other hand, you're always saying this is about more than just me. Your relationship is with this community. It's with a faith tradition that's much bigger than just this church. And I'm gonna, I came, I'm going to go at another time. It can't just be about me. It can't just be about your friend sitting in the pew next to you. It's got to be that might be the way in, I've had people join my congregation because they connected with me on Twitter, for instance,
but you see, that's why I said, I can't just say Daniel.
Yeah.
Because you should be Reverend Daniel. It doesn't mean that I give away my power to you.
Right. Yeah.
It just means that I recognize you as a conduit for a larger thing than either of us.
Right. So I'm totally fine if you want to call me Rev Daniel.
See,
I just wouldn't insist on that, because for some people, those honorifics get in the way, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you don't walk up to the Pope and go, "What's going on, big guy?"
Well, I have a feeling this Pope might be. Well, actually, no, not since seeing the video of him slapping hands. I don't know.
No, I like that. Well, have you read his encyclical on climate change?
Yes. Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
It truly is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I bumped into David Suzuki at an event a while ago, and we used to work together at the CBC.
Right.
So we knew each other, and I was working at a college, and he was there to speak. And he said, "You know that I'm really not a religious person." I said, "Yeah, I know, atheist, scientist, I get it." He goes, "All right, confession. I read the encyclical on climate change from the Pope, and I cried halfway through it."
Really?
Yeah. He said, "It truly moved me."
And see, we're not, people don't hear about that. We're not talking about those things. We're talking about the Pope slapping someone's hand, or the Pope, the Pope still won't let gay men be priests or whatever.
Well, that is important.
I'm not saying that's not important, but like you said, we fixate on certain things, right?
Of course. Well, we all have our point of entry to things. All right. So let's go back to the calling was making itself more manifest even as a child. You understood that there was something in this that called you to say, "I want to be part of this."
Mm-hmm.
So then you're put in a position where your emerging sexuality says, "I'm not heterosexual."
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it would be much easier for me if I was.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to be a lot of trouble.
Yep.
What made you stick to it?
Well, I guess that's the short answer would be God, right? I mean, I think for me, that was part of the sign that this is a calling, because I had every good reason to sort of say, this isn't for me, or I'm not what the church is looking for, or this isn't going to be easy. In fact, it may not even be possible, right? Someone's going to object based on this, and they won't even ordain me. But the pull was still there. And, and I've had lots of conversations with people over the years who are feeling a calling to some kind of ministry. And, and one of the things I always say is when you come up with your list a mile long of all the good reasons you shouldn't do this, and you're probably not the right person to do it, and yet that feeling still is there and won't go away, you need to pay attention to that.
Like anything.
Yeah.
If it keeps coming back up, there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
But you lowered your expectations, right? Like you thought, well, maybe I can just sort of be gay, but no one needs to know I'm gay.
Yeah, it was the don't ask, don't tell idea. And at that time I was thinking that's the best I can hope for.
That's the best you could hope for.
And
yet it didn't work out that way.
No. God has better ideas.
Were you surprised that you actually got to become yourself and become a priest?
I was surprised that I was surprised that I had as much support that I did, and that it actually happened as smoothly and as easily for me as it did. I'm always aware that I'm in a fairly privileged position as a gay man in the church. I came into a church at a particular time where they were starting to move on that. And there was a lot of support for me, even within the institution. And I was doing so living in a fairly liberal, multicultural, accepting part of the world. That's, and my experience with other people is that's not typical, right?
No, I mean, there are still countries in this world, one our prime minister just visited, where, you literally are going to be killed for this.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a kid, growing up in show business, it was a completely normalized idea that someone was gay or wasn't gay. It didn't matter. It was like we were all in it together. Or as a friend of mine said about musicals, that is the music of my people.
Right. Exactly.
And so that was just all normal stuff.
I did musical theater in high school, by the way.
Of course you did. But, I did too, though. Okay, so, yeah, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. I enjoyed doing that one. We did a takeoff on Fiddler on the Roof at my United Synagogue Youth thing called Gong in the Roof. No. I can't even believe we did that. That's just like a horrible memory. I had my mouth frozen that day because I'd had a cavity filled. In those days, that took like half an hour. I remember being on the wings. I'm digressing completely. And I see my dad. My Moroccan dad, brown skinned and sitting, and I'm just looking at him and I'm thinking, oh, my father's here. Oh my God, I hope my mouth is frozen. My mouth, what am I going to do? And as soon as I got out there, I didn't realize that adrenaline could do this, but the freezing went completely out of my mouth and it was like, hello. And I just started talking. It was just like that. And I thought, wow, I like being in the theater. You can forget your pain.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the good part.
Maybe there's some connections there with religion and church too, right?
Well, yes, it's true. Yeah, that's true. The transcendency, because there's one thing you mentioned while you were talking about the experience. You said to let themselves engage in the mystery. That's a very loaded word.
Yeah, and often, and I even as I was saying it, there was a part of me that was rolling my eyes a little bit because I've heard, that can be used in such a, it's like a cop out. Well, it's a mystery, meaning you don't have to try to understand, and nor do I have to try to explain it. But I think my experience is the deeper you go into it, the more you realize the mystery of it, right? It's like scientists, saying they're quantum physics, the more you explore and the more you explain and the more you realize that there's more that we don't understand.
And we have a problem with that because we live in a rational age, and rationalism since the Enlightenment has been the way to be.
Well, what you can understand, you can control. Right.
So then that goes to the question of, well, why would I believe in God? I can't see it. Which the answer is often, well, why do you believe in love? You can't see that either, but you sure spend a lot of time worrying about it and trying to make sure it happens and hold on to it.
And that's, for me, that's what, belief is about it's an experience of something that I may have a hard time articulating to someone else. But it's like love. You people know what you mean because they've had their own experience of it, which may not be exactly yours, but there's something they can touch that goes, oh, that's what you're talking about. And for me, it's helping to people to understand that's what I mean by God.
And I like mystery. Like I like not knowing. I like being confused and staying confused. It's certainty that scares me.
Some of us are very good at confusion.
Right. But it scares me to be certain.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, that's the way it is, Yeah.
Well, and people confuse certainty and faith, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The very word faith suggests I have to trust because I don't know.
Especially in clergy.
Yes.
Like the clergy I speak to, when we talk about the notion of God, they're like, people just think that I am dead certain that I know exactly what God is and what feels like, looks like, smells like, tastes like. And it changes all the time. There are times where I'm 1,000 miles away from it, and there's times where it's right inside me.
Yep.
So that's to me, I trust those people more. Because the ones who are certain scare me. It's the Chinese proverb: to be uncertain is uncomfortable; to be certain is ridiculous.
Yeah, right. Well, I've said to people, my job is not to be the lighthouse up on the hill saying I've gotten there and now I'm just going to show you how to get there. It's my job is to actually be down on the road with you, walking, going, I think it's this way. Let's head down and see.
Guy.
Yeah. And if it's not,
I think we can go this way.
If it's not, then we'll backtrack together and figure out a different way.
Yeah, but for some people, if they go down that road and you were wrong, that's it for you.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll find other companions that want to keep walking with me then.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the thing. All right, let's talk a little bit about that word, that 4-letter word in this society, God. Yeah. So if I say God, what do you say to me? What is that?
For me, God is more of a who than a what.
Okay.
Which, it's I think people struggle with the
Yes, the Disneyfication.
Yes,
of God.
exactly.
Yes.
You know, and I'm not talking about the old man in the sky with the beard, but I think God is relational. You know, so for me, God can't be sort of like the Force of Star Wars, right? Where there's just this power that's kind of there, and if you know the right words or the right actions, you can somehow control it. It's God for me is a being to be in relationship with.
A being, an actual being.
Well, I experience God in that way, but I think God is beyond being. I think being comes from God.
So
it's a mystery, Rob.
No. Oh, well, good. That's settled. You see, because I'm not a believer that in my own way that God is a noun, a thing.
Yeah, a verb.
It is
God
a verb.
is, yeah.
It is a verb to me.
So maybe God is more of a doing than a being?
Well, to me, it's a kind of a flow, a relentless creative flow that I have no idea. See, in Judaism, God's unknowable.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah.
So you don't go to a definition with any kind of confidence because it's unknowable. Then who am I to start telling you I know what it is? And yet I need a particular and a universal. So the universal is unknowable. The particular is I'd like to have a conversation. I'd like to talk to something. Now, you guys have a real advantage here because you have a guy. Jesus
advantage and disadvantage in the sense
Why?
that, because then we have a God that is knowable. Right?
Yes.
And yes, so I see that as the advantage, but then the disadvantage is then we also give up we can sometimes give up the transcendence and the unknowability of God. And our whole history as Christians is about heresies and dogmas and defining and what is God and what is not God, and who's in and who's out depending on their certainties, right?
It can be very divisive. So Matthew Fox, right? He goes to, look, folks, it's Jesus-olatry. This whole thing's become about this guy.
Right.
And he wanted creation spirituality. He wanted wonder and awe.
Right.
And that the wonder and awe, one of the reasons we have, like I was ranting at the beginning, one of the reasons we have a climate crisis is because we have very little respect for wonder and awe. I mean, look through a Hubble telescope at a picture of the galaxies, let alone the universe itself, and you think, what is this? What are we in the middle of?
And I agree with you. I think that we do lack that. For me as a Christian, I always struggle with that amongst my own people because it's like, look, we're one of the few faith groups that say divinity entered into creation, became incarnate, took on a human body, lived amongst us. We say that. And yet we seem to disregard the sanctity and the sacredness of the very material that we say God actually entered into and became part of.
Right.
You'd think that a religion that puts incarnation at the center of its belief system would say, so the material world is good and sacred and needs to be cared for. And we need to see the divinity in that. And we don't.
So there's an evangelical church down the street from my house, a new one, very popular, lots of young families going.
They got that going for them.
Can't find the place to park my car in the street. It's really happening. And somebody was putting out painted rocks with little sayings on them. One of them was, God is good. And I wanted to find the person to say, first of all, if you don't mind, landscape proselytizing isn't exactly what I had in mind. Not exactly our thing. But then I wanted to say that I found that to be a very limited idea of what a God is. That God is also takes in the horribleness of people and the horribleness that can happen and the things we can't console ourselves to. God is also in Auschwitz. But it's what we as human beings do with it that is the difference. It's not. So when someone says to you, God is love, I've always thought that's very nice. I don't understand it. Can you explain that to me if it makes sense to you?
Well, I mean, I think I'm learning what that means. I think I've always held to that, but what exactly does that mean to say God is love? And for me, I mean, it goes back to what you were talking about, God not being a noun, but a verb, right? This sort of back and forth thing, but also for me, that underlines the relational aspect of God, because how do you have love unless you have a being that is loving, that's giving the love, and a being that's receiving the love?
Isn't that just another Disneyfication that we would give human emotions to what God is?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you're looking at it. You can either say we're projecting our own human emotions onto the divine, or you can say the reason we have those emotions and the reason we recognize it is because it's connecting us to something that's bigger than us.
Right. So, in your faith, in your practice, in your life, what part does being gay play?
Well, it's a part of who I am. So it's, it's an integral part of my identity. So, I mean, it's not something I compartmentalize and say, I'm not having sex right now, so this doesn't matter, or, because of course sexuality is about more than just that, right? Yeah. And it's something that I think that the church still struggles with, is having a theology of sexuality and embodiment. But
hey, that'd be something to write.
Well, there's a lot that are writing on it right now. But
you.
Me? Oh, yeah. I'll get to that. I haven't even got Sunday sermon yet done, Ralph, but sure, I'll get to that.
Forget the sermon. I'm talking book here.
Okay.
The theology of sexuality.
Well, yeah. And so I think that, I mean, it plays an important role for me in the sense that my experience as a gay man, and I say this as a white, middle class, fairly privileged gay man, so I understand the privilege there. But even still, my experience as a gay man has given me an experience of being ostracized, of being silenced, of being rejected, and for me, in terms of my spirituality, that plays a huge role in understanding what I think God is calling us to do in terms of reconciling those that have been pushed aside, of reaching out to those that have been condemned, of judging those because they're different. So. The whole experience of exile and return, this is your home and God brings you back to it. I mean, I can relate to that in some ways.
When you realized you were gay, did you think I don't know if a part of me would feel relieved and happy, but another part of me would feel heartbroken that I'm going to be having a harder life.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that was my parents' reaction. I mean, I grew up in a home where it was acknowledged that there were gay people, and I know my parents had friends who were gay and lesbian. So on one hand, I saw that they weren't rejected, which gave me some assurance. But on the other hand, we didn't talk about it, and there was still that sense of this isn't a good thing. And I think that, for when I came out, I think that was my parents' biggest concern. It wasn't that they had a problem with that I was gay, but that they knew life was going to be harder for me because of it.
So are they both still alive?
No, they're both
they're both passed.
Yeah.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah, within 4 months of each other, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a thing. That's a thing. When our parents go, especially if you've had both parents go, then you're an orphan.
But it makes me realize, actually, it's interesting you say that, because my sister said that to me a while after they'd both passed, and she said, I just feel like I'm an orphan. And she said, don't you feel that way? And I didn't have that feeling. And I thought about what's the difference between our experiences. And then I realized I have a sense of myself as part of this, and I don't want to romanticize the church or anything like that. I certainly have my struggles with it, but I have a connection with a community that I don't feel like I'm an orphan, where she didn't have that.
Right.
And that for me, that underlined part of, that's part of what this does for me, is it anchors me in a narrative and in a community that's bigger than just my biological family. So I don't feel like an orphan.
That's interesting. So she never became religious.
I mean, it's there for her. And, I think it's part of her.
What does she think of what you're doing?
I think she thinks that I will, if there is a heaven, she'll drop my name at the door and maybe that'll get her in.
I'm sorry. I'm looking for a Rev Daniel here. I do not see one.
I've been avoiding you all of my life. Why would I want to not do that for eternity? No, I'm kidding. I love you, Corey.
He doesn't seem to be on the list. Get into the film festival you can do, but you can't get into heaven. I don't know. It's so crazy. I mean, think about it. A gay man married.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wasn't when I was ordained.
No,
right?
but
yeah.
Look at, middle class, as you say, creating family, like, it's 40 years ago, 30 years ago, forget it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it might give you some faith that religions are living things.
I think that, that's definitely affected how it's like, I think the Spirit is moving us in a direction. I think we can detour it. We can become an obstacle to it. We can slow it down. But it's like Martin Luther King said, the arc of history, it bends towards justice. It's a very big, long arc sometimes.
You do believe that, though.
I do.
See, that's what I'm having trouble with right now.
Yeah, I was reflecting on that at the beginning with your rant.
Yeah, because it's hard. I mean,
it is.
We are. If you're a student of history, you're deeply worried right now because the trends of authoritarianism,
yes,
and xenophobia and targeting, and as a Jewish guy, we're always hypersensitive to that. I mean, I remember when Stephen Harper sent out Jewish high holiday cards to people, and I thought, this guy doesn't understand who we are. We don't like when people know where we live.
Yes, well,
right? It makes us uncomfortable.
I was thinking about that. I was thinking about that this morning with the whole, the RCMP and the indigenous, the protests
with
and
Siouan,
and not to get all political, but Trudeau was talking about the rule of law, and I'm a Trudeau fan, but I was listening to him and I was thinking, but the fact that it's the rule of law has justified a whole lot of horrible things that we would all agree were immoral and wrong, and we don't want to go there again. The rule of law put indigenous kids in residential schools,
Anglican ones.
Yes, and Catholic. So
yeah. Way to spread the jam. Way to spread the
and some
jam.
Presbyterian.
Yeah, no synagogues, if you'll notice, because we weren't allowed in.
Exactly.
There were quotas at medical school at post-secondary institutions for how many Jews you could have in medical school.
Wow.
Yeah, no, these are things. This is what we do to each other.
But see, this is also what I mean. I think you're right. When you have a sense of history, you that can give you a sense of hyper awareness of these bad things that are happening. But also, I try to have a sense of history that also, yes, we go through these things and they're horrible and people suffer, and we try to avoid that, and we want to learn from history. But my sense of history also is that we move through those dark times and hopefully come out the other side. And
well, I mean, we convulse. I don't think there's such a thing as progress that is incremental positive.
No.
I think that there's pendulums.
Yes.
And I think that within every person is the same struggle. Like, to me, Bible is not about literal historical events, even though some of them are grounded in those things.
Yeah.
It's really metaphorical. If I'm looking for Pharaoh, I'm not looking for the actual Pharaoh Ramses II. I'm looking for the tyrant inside me.
Well, and that's why these stories still speak and still carry truth and teach us.
But how many clergy stand up in front of congregations and say, what God wants from you, and God said this, and God told the people. And to me, I just want to interrupt them and go, excuse me, it's not a guy.
Yeah. Well, and
right? The Lord King of the universe. It's not what we're talking about here. It's
but people are responding
bigger.
With that, right? They're responding with their feet. They're by just not being there.
Right. So what? Right? So there's the next thing. There is the crisis of disengagement, of decoupling, that people have decided that they want their spirituality, but they don't want their religion. You're one of the people who has to try to figure out how to keep the membership up, how to get the pews full, how to make sure that your church is not a hollow shell that no longer serves the community. You must be knocking your head against the wall.
Constantly. And I think there's a struggle with, on one hand, there's the reality of how do we bring more people in, and how do we have enough money to keep going, and how do we make this a quote unquote success, right? But on the other hand, this is about more than, this is not just a product I'm trying to sell, and it's not about just coming up with the latest gimmick that will, which is what a lot of people get into.
Well, it's
right?
tough, right? It is a retail business.
Yeah.
I mean, you have customers, you have to make them happy, and they got to show up at the door.
And head office is asking you for your statistics, and and making decisions based on that. And, and so that's a real part of the job. But on the other hand, I also have to believe that, yes, that people say the church is dying. And I always want to say, well, yes and no. There's parts of it that are dying. There's forms of religion and institutions that are dying. Maybe they're supposed to die.
Right.
I'm part of a faith that talks about death and resurrection. So if we're going to talk about death, what is being resurrected? What new thing is coming to birth? And maybe we need to be focusing on that as much as, bewailing what's dying.
What do you say when people use scripture to say that you are not legitimate? As a gay man, you are not legitimate. Because they do use scripture to say.
Of course, yeah. I can use scripture to get into a Bible battle with them, although I've never found that to be helpful in moving changing anyone's mind.
No.
To me, people will say, how do you reconcile being gay and being Christian, or being gay and being a minister? And I always just say, well, I don't have to reconcile it. God did that himself, when they called me. I'm a Trinitarian. When God called me and decided to call a gay person to serve as a priest in the church, God did the reconciling. My job is to live that out.
So when they literally use lines of scripture, did you ever used to watch The West Wing?
Yes.
Okay. So do you remember that one where Sheen, as the president, walks in and is the talk show radio host?
Yep. Yeah.
And then says, I just have a few questions for you. So my brother does not keep the Sabbath. I'm just trying to figure out, do I have to stone him to death?
Yes.
Or can the community stone him to death?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you can justify anything by drawing out lines of scripture out of context. Well, look,
it's no different than politics. Yeah. I mean, in political communications, the name of the game is to cherry pick the statistics to frame the narrative that you want people to believe, and ignoring the rest of the actual real numbers, and in that way lying to people by omission.
Yes.
Right? And this is what every political party does all the time. And it's brutal to our sense of civilization and culture that we have this. The other part of that is absolutism. You are absolutely wrong if you are the NDP and I am the Conservatives, and I am absolutely right. And then you flip that. And all we get is this, what we have now, and you and I both, live on Twitter in certain ways, is this polarization.
Yes.
Right.
And that it's funny because you mentioned that, because I was listening the other day to CBC Ideas, and they were rebroadcasting Massey lectures from, I think, the set 1974, and George Steiner, I think, he was talking about the nostalgia for the absolute. And this was in the 1974, and yet it's so relevant, some of the things he was saying. And I think that's something we always struggle with, both in politics and in religion, right? We want the absolute. We want certainty, like you were saying. We want black and white. I want to know I'm on the right team. I'm in. And part of knowing that I'm on the right side is about knowing who's on the wrong side, and defining myself up and against that. And that's something that I see that on social media. It's always been part of religion, and I really struggle against that, All
right. So here's one in terms of people just saying it's just true, and then me saying as a tourist on this particular thing, because I'm not Christian, the Virgin Mary.
That's out of left field. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about the Virgin Mary.
Yeah, because to me, that's one of those things where a person in the pediatric, like we were speaking at the beginning, if that's what you were taught, that there was this virgin who gave birth because God inseminated her, basically. And then the average rational person goes, come on, what are you, nuts? How do you explain it to me so that I can understand it in a way that I don't need you to prove it to me?
Right. Well, no, I can't. It's a miracle. It's a mystery.
But explain something I can derive from that story that makes my life a better thing.
I think you've got the incarnation of God. Depending on you start with this young peasant girl who in the context of her own culture is about as low as you get on the totem pole in terms of power and agency, and God asks her if she will be part of this plan for the incarnation of the divine, and no one's asking her father, no one's asking her fiance to, her husband to be, no one's asking her older brother. It's up to her whether she wants to give herself and her most inner being, her most private self to God, and that's completely her choice, and that God waits for her to say yes. God doesn't force anything, and it's up to her. And when we're able to open ourselves unreservedly to the divine and allow the divine into our most deepest, private, intimate self, something divine is born of that.
Chewing on that. That's good.
I'm going to write that down for next Christmas.
That's right. Why am I wasting all my A stuff on this guy?
Exactly.
I got sermons to write for the love of Pete. And I mean Pete.
Oh, poor Pete.
Poor Pete, yeah. I'd rather be John, but then I wouldn't have a head and it'd all be awful.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Even when you were saying that to me, I was thinking to myself, it's so much what you're born into in most cases that you're willing to believe is narrative, right? Yeah. So me as a Jewish person is listening to that and thinking, yeah, you could rationalize it that way. But then the other part of it is, does that story divorce us from our sexuality? That if something is so divinely inspired that it transcends sexual acts, it transcends sexuality, because sexuality is beneath that kind of thing.
And it's certainly been used to do that. It's been used to divorce us from our sexuality. It's been used especially against women. That the only good woman is a virgin who somehow also manages to be a mother. And that's what men put up on a pedestal. And yes, I think Mary has been a very difficult
pieces.
Yeah. So, but there's been a lot done on reclaiming Mary from a feminist standpoint, that she can be a way in as opposed to an obstacle.
Does feminism have a place in your particular church?
Yes, in the sense, when you say my church, you mean that my congregation?
Yeah.
I'm very open about the equality of male and females.
Would you deconstruct the Virgin Mary narrative in a sermon like you just did now, in terms of its effect as a patriarchal device?
I would address it. I mean, the thing, you can only do so much in a sermon, and you're also talking to a whole group of people who are all in different places. And so I probably could go more into that in a study group or a Bible study.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I certainly would in a sermon talk about the difficulty people have and and I certainly have done this, how certain stories, certain images from the Bible have been used and misused. And how we can see them differently. And I think that's part of what people are looking for.
You have a very political job too, right? I mean, you can.
Yes. Although it's funny how many people will say politics has no place in religion.
Oh, nonsense.
But how can you deny that
I'll tell you, there's one of my teachers, Rev Zalman Schachter Shalomi. So Rev Zalman was hired in a synagogue at one point and decided for the Friday night service he was going to do something really interesting. So he had everybody come in and said, no, put the books down. We're all good. We're going to just sit in silence. And they had to meditate, and then he did a guided meditation, and he thought, this went really well. And then he gets a phone call from the chair of the board.
Right.
And he's called into the Thursday board meeting, and they go, Reb Zalman.
Yep.
And there's a stack of prayer books beside the guy, and he goes, you see these? We paid for these. Mm-hmm. We expect you to use them. And that was that. Yeah. And he realized that you can't pull a congregation towards an idea or something that you believe to be the next thing. You've got to find ways to plant the seeds and see if they go that way.
Yeah, exactly. And even the things we're talking about. I mean, some people in a congregation might say, you're being politically correct, right? Well, no, I'm actually talking about, like, you might see it that way. I see it as I'm addressing issues of inequality and injustice, which are very biblical issues,
Right.
So people will say all the time, how do you keep politics out of the pulpit? Well, you can't. But there's a difference between being political and partisan. I'm not going to stand in the pulpit and say, this is the party you should vote for in the next election. But I might say, here are some issues that are on the table that we as Christians and as Canadians are facing. And what does our faith teach about some of these things? And then it's up to them to decide what they're going to do with their vote based on that. But to suggest that politics needs to, that it's not political, then you're saying your faith has no actual application to life, because life is political.
So what do you do as clergy for self-care?
Days off, Sabbath. The issue of Sabbath becomes really important, and that used to just be a word to me, and I've come to realize what it means to not wait until work is done, but to say, it is the Sabbath, so I am not doing work. I am not available. Having healthy boundaries around
Sunday
accessibility.
You gotta work.
Yep.
So what's your Sabbath?
So my Sabbath is Monday.
Monday.
Yeah, and I am not. Things happen. Sometimes funerals happen, and they have to happen on a Monday. But generally, no. I'm not available. I'm not up for meetings. I'm not calling in. I'm not checking my email. And
good.
Strict about that.
See, that's our best invention.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one we nailed that one. No, come on, seriously, we nailed that one.
Email?
No, Sabbath.
Oh, Sabbath. Yes, yes. That's the
email.
That's the one we really took from you.
My dad used to watch anything on TV, and as soon as he'd see somebody go, he's Jewish. So he did that with Dan Rather once on CBS. Dad, he's not Jewish. No, he's Jewish. Look at him. It's just because he really liked Dan Rather. Anybody he liked, they were Jewish.
Must be a mensch.
No, but the Sabbath thing it really is our best export.
Yeah. Yes.
And yet, if the entire world took a Sabbath, took a 25-hour break from everything and literally unplugged the machine, our GHG emissions would dramatically go down. 17% reduction in GHG emissions if you did that around the world.
Yep.
And yet we can't stop.
Well, I mean, even,
we're hamster wheeled.
Talking from a Christian perspective, but we talk about Sabbath and we talk about the importance of it. We don't do it. I always found it was a much weaker proposition in the Christian world than the Jewish world. Like in the Jewish world, you never stop talking about it in prayers. You never stop talking about it in liturgy. It's just there. Yeah.
But in the Christian world, I think it was sort of an add-on, wasn't it?
Well, and in part, I think in the Christian world, it's a little bit, I think there's a bit of confusion because we know what the Sabbath is, but we don't practice it the way the Jews do. And so Sunday is our day, but it's, the Lord's Day is a day of worship. It's not really a day of rest. So I think the idea of Sabbath being about rest and stopping kind of got lost.
Well, we do both. You're supposed to do worship. So 6 days of doing, 1 day of being.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But the rest of it really, if you're in the Orthodox part of the faith, you really literally shut the machine down.
Yeah.
You don't drive. You don't do laundry. You don't turn on lights.
Yeah.
And people think of it as, mildly Mennonite, old school, or Amish, but there's a reason those people live that way. It's a prophylactic against the relentlessness of modernity.
And I think the challenge is taking it seriously and actually doing it, but at the same time, it not becoming another legalistic, oppressive thing, right? Like if the Sabbath is about freedom and about rest, in the Christian, in Christian history, the Sabbath, was could be very oppressive. It was all about what you weren't supposed to do as opposed to what you were supposed to do.
So here's a question. Do you ever tire of people identifying you as a gay clergy? Like, do you ever think, for the love of God, I'm just a human being?
Yeah. Yeah. Because, that's all people ever want to talk to me about, right?
Really?
And get my opinion on. And
so you're like the mascot for...
Yeah.
This is what it looks like to be a gay clergy.
Yep.
Well, that must be just stultifying at times. It's
but it also, it's important because,
Yeah, but then you're
You have
supposed
an
to.
opportunity-
Everything you do is the measure of. It's like when I say to somebody, if I'm wearing a kippah
Yeah.
and I spit on the street, someone goes, "Oh, look at Jews spit on the street.
Yes.
That's what they do."
Yeah.
Oh, look at these gay clergy. The gay clergy do that. Like, don't you want to just go? Oh, you got to stop it already.
Yeah, and I do.
Oh, good. That's self-care.
That's self-care.
It's just, you know.
But you can't get away from that. I mean, it's part of part of who you are, and so you can either resist that or you can use it to have some conversations that need to be had about sexuality and religion.
Right.
Right.
So a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
But still, this definition of a person by their sexual orientation, we're still pretty hung up on this nonsense.
Well, and that's part of why you also, like, for me, it's about. People ask, why do you share so much on social media? And, and I say, and I do things that maybe don't fit in with people's idea of a minister or an Anglican priest. But I think that's part of it, is because I want them to realize I'm a whole person,
Yeah.
and the Rev part is like my sexuality. It's interwoven through all of that. It's not a compartment, but there's more to it than your stereotype of what that means.
Yeah. It's still, to me, it's, I've known different people in different ways that have ended up having, someone who gets a certain kind of cancer and then has to become the poster boy for, fight. What do you think of this thing? Battling cancer, fighting, after a long struggle, after a long battle. What do you think of that kind of language?
Well, I mean, because I went through cancer. I had leukemia when I was in university. It's come back twice. So I've been through that, and I've used that language. But it also suggests that, so if someone who has died, did they lose the war? Did they not fight hard enough?
Right.
Did they use the wrong strategy?
Right.
And I went through some survivor guilt around that because of all that language. And I was like, I don't remember fighting a war. I just lived and did what I was supposed to do because I wanted to live, right?
Exactly.
And I didn't make some courageous decision to live. That's just inborn in me that I want to keep living. But yeah, so I think that's problematic.
And what do you think of of assisted dying?
Oh, you're kidding. I think
you thought this was going to be an easy conversation.
We're just going to talk about gay stuff.
What do you think of Hamilton? Because I can't afford to go. So if you've seen it, tell me. No.
Hamilton.
Whatever. All right.
I think assisted dying is. I mean, I think there are really important discussions to have around that. I have been present to with three people who have had assisted deaths. And what?
And what was the experience like?
For all of them and for their families, it was a difficult. Well, for two of the families, they were very supportive of this decision, and everybody was on the same page. And in another case, some of the family, they were willing to support the choice because there was nothing they could do about it, but this was not something that they were happy about.
And how did you feel about being there?
Conflicted.
Now, what's the conflict? That you're not letting God's path happen?
No, I don't think. No, I don't see it that way, because I see it. I do see it as when someone is at the point of suffering and they're not going to get better and their death is inevitable, but how long can we drag this on? Why should someone have to stick around and suffer longer?
Well, for some religious people, they would just go, well, it's God's plan that this is the way this person is to die.
Yeah, but I don't, I mean, so was I circumventing God's plan when I had chemotherapy to stop myself from dying of leukemia?
Right.
And
were you?
I don't think so. And I don't think a lot of the people who would be arguing against assisted death would have said that I did anything wrong either. So then that's when I would say, well, so then what is the difference?
Well, free will is the central part of this, right? I mean, that in Jewish tradition, that would be the central conversation.
Yes.
That we have been given free will.
Yeah.
Then we choose to. There are people who choose to have a macrobiotic diet to work against cancer and in their body. Other people believe stop fighting your body, become friends with, take the journey with the cancer and move through it.
Yep.
And other people are fighting like hell.
Yep.
Right. So, but it's free will.
Yes.
Right. So, yeah. I don't know how
for me, the conflict was, you're talking about being, reverend and all that. It's what I was worried about is I'm knowing that this is not a settled thing in my church, right? And that even in my own congregation, there would be lots of different opinions. Is your presence there? And I'm there for a pastoral reason. The person who's dying wants me to be there and accompany them on their last journey. So I'm not going to say no, but I'm also conscious that is my presence here saying to everybody in the room, including the doctors and nurses, I endorse this, or my church endorses it, which it doesn't necessarily.
Right.
So, that was an important conversation to have with the families, that this is about this person's decision and I'm here to support you in your choices. This is not about what I think, although of course they asked me what I thought.
Right.
And
what did you think when the person was actually passing?
Mm-hmm.
What was going through you? Because it's like at Wednesday at 2, I will be dying. And you're there and it's 2:03 and they're dying.
Yep.
This is not being there for a last breath because you were there.
No.
It's because it's an appointment.
Yeah, and that appointment aspect kind of makes you think in terms of like an execution in a way,
Right.
Except that this is something they're choosing to do. They're not, the King of England hasn't decided to cut off their head. And the experience of it was very peaceful. They were able to close their eyes and last thing they see are the people that they want to see. They were able to say their goodbyes and say what they wanted to say. And, they didn't suddenly go of a major heart attack and take everybody's surprise and nobody was able to, you didn't have family saying, I wish I'd had that moment to tell them I love them. They had that moment.
Are you comfortable witnessing death?
Yes.
Why?
Because I believe that when we're letting go, there's someone else taking hold. And I don't feel like I'm just sort of letting them go into the abyss.
Is there a heaven?
I believe so.
See, we don't have heaven. We don't have heaven and hell.
Well, I mean, I think again, I would say it depends on what people mean by heaven, right?
Really nice condo.
Oh, that wouldn't be heaven to me. I have a nice condo, and I don't see it as heaven.
The concierge service is apparently quite
true,
good.
Yeah.
What to do today? No, it is that sense that we have in our limited human minds of another actual place, as opposed to this notion that I have, which is much more about the idea that we are a cellular spark of the divine energy.
Yeah.
That reimagines itself in another way that is unknowable to me, as opposed to Ralph goes up and sees his dad, and his aunts and uncles, and
Well, I would say my idea of heaven is probably closer to what you just described, but at the same time, if we're going to say it's unknowable, I also can't say with certainty that it isn't. So, if someone says
right, but there's always an intuition of truth, right? That's we use that as
I think my
it's just resonating with my because for some people the question of belief isn't really about theologies and intellectual ideas.
No,
it's about when they're really actually present. Mm-hmm. What comes to them?
Yes,
right.
And I think what resonates with me, at least. Is this idea of peace, of union with whatever I believe God to be, the divine. I believe in the eternity of love, of what has been loved is somehow never completely lost.
Well, why wouldn't there then be the eternity of hate and the eternity of
well,
ennui?
I mean, those with the idea of hell might suggest that there is.
See, because that's the thing that always seems to surface is it's supposed to be about love. And I just think, well, that pleases me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it might be a bit of a duvet, a nice comfy duvet. I don't think that love will always persist. And yet, when you talk to people who know they're going to be dying in a while,
mm-hmm.
all that really matters to them anymore is who they've loved and who's loved them.
Yes.
So maybe that's what it's about.
And I don't see love and hate as two equal but opposite things. I think
they coexist.
Yeah, and I think
on
hatred is Yeah. So I mean, to be able to say that love can exist eternally, but not hate, I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, but you would want more love and promote love and in some ways hold on to it. And for most people, hate is very toxic and they don't want to keep it. For other people, hate keeps them going.
It's
fear really, but it's called hate.
Yeah. Although I would say that it only keeps you going for so long. It'll ultimately destroy you.
Yes. And that's where we're at again.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm worried.
It brings us right back to your opening rant.
The beginning.
Good bookend.
So I don't know if this was the conversation you were thinking we were going to have, but
I was just open to whatever.
You see, you're available.
I am.
Hineni.
To the mystery.
Hineni in Hebrew. I am here.
I am here, and I'm glad to be here.
And so am I. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, you get to talk to a Reverend Daniel. It's so cool. I haven't talked to a rabbi yet on this show, have I? No. What's
I know some cool rabbis.
I know some cool rabbis.
Sure you
Maybe
do.
we should. Hey, do you ever have a conclave of gay clergy?
Gay clergy, yeah. I was also just a couple years ago. I was in a show in the Toronto Fringe Festival with a gay Unitarian minister, and the first female rabbi in Canada, and we had a show together.
Who was the rabbi?
Elise Goldstein.
Oh, Elise Goldstein.
Yeah, good friend of mine.
Wow. That sounds like a bad joke.
That was the tagline, right? A priest, a rabbi, and a minister walk into a theater.
And a musical breaks out.
Yeah. There were some jazz hands involved. Two of us are gay, of course there was.
You got to write something. You got to write a musical. That's it.
Maybe the next Hamilton.
The next Hamilton, Ontario. That's right. Not that Hamilton. Call it not that Hamilton.
That's great.
It'll be in the East End of Hamilton. Actually, I'm working on a project about something like that.
The East End of Hamilton?
No, I'm working with some friends that we're just in the beginning of the idea of connecting people who don't have voice in mostly East End Hamilton with artists to create opportunities for voice. Yes. So, a single mother's choir, right? Things like that. A 1 minute film festival, giving homeless people phones and saying, make your stories, and then having Mohawk students do something with it and edit it into a piece.
Well, my friend Tracy Aaron Smith, who is, she's a writer, director, actress, and she put together the Clergy Project, and she has a company called Solo Theater, and that's what she does. She works with groups, often marginalized groups, to sort of tell their story and put it on stage, and that's exactly what she does.
It's beautiful. All right, do a plug. Tell people who you are and tell them where your church is.
Okay, I'm Daniel Brereton, the Reverend Daniel Brereton.
Thank you.
And my church is St. John the Baptist Dixie, which is in Mississauga at Dixie and Cothra. And you can find me on Twitter at Rev Daniel.
See, that was perfect. You can find me on Twitter at Ralph Ben Murgy. You can find me on Gmail at ralphbenmurgy@gmail.com. You can subscribe to this fine program. All you got to do is like it, subscribe it. Go to any podcatcher if people are wondering how we find this beast, and look for Not That Kind of Rabbi. The more people who engage, the more energized we'll become, and hopefully we'll get to keep doing this sort of thing. In the meantime, I would really appreciate it if you take care of each other. And Hamilton, Ontario. Not that Hamilton. I think we've got something.
This podcast has been produced by TMDS and accelerated by Roam Phone. Roam Phone brings you the most reliable virtual phone service to run your business and protect your home number